Okay, now it's time to talk about inspections on your listing. We're waiting for that buyer and that buyer's agent to deliver the inspection to you. One thing you might want to consider encouraging your seller to do is to have a pre-inspection done prior to listing the property. Because if you wait until you get a pended deal, you accept an offer, you're in escrow, everything's moving forward to closing, waiting for that buyer to do the inspection and receive an inspection report or an inspection response, it's kind of a mystery for the seller. They don't really know what to expect. There might be a skeleton in the closet, so to speak. But if you spent a little bit of money, if that seller had invested some money in a pre-inspection, they would have all those items in front of them so they didn't have to worry about something unexpected to happen. Anyway, that's the little pre-talk here about pre-inspections. But assuming most of the time that doesn't happen, and so let's just say we're going now into what I call the second round of negotiations. So first round of negotiations is you list the house on the market, you receive an offer, you negotiate price, terms, closing date, those kind of things. And then you have a mutually accepted contract, goes into escrow, earnest money is delivered, and then one of the next steps, of course, is the inspections. We have different types of inspections. We have the home inspection. If there's a well water, there might be a well inspection or at least a water test that's conducted. The septic inspection as well. They might want to do a sewer scope. So there's a lot of different eyeballs looking at the property and its functionality and condition. And so the buyer has the opportunity to take that information, to gather up that information, and then to submit a proposal back to the seller, which is an inspection response. You know, saying, we still want to buy the house, but these items are of concern, they need to be resolved somehow. So it's the second round of negotiations because we're not really sure what the buyer is willing to do or not willing to do. And so to talk to your seller and at least have prepare them for that second round of negotiations. It's not a guarantee. The buyer can still get out of the deal during that 10-day window, okay? Typically it's a 10-day inspection period. But during that inspection contingency period, buyer can walk. So it makes sense for the seller to cooperate, collaborate, and try to, you know, come up with an agreement that works for all parties so they can keep moving forward. Okay, so as the realtor, you're going to be involved in setting these showings up. There's going to be, you know, like I said, if there's the home inspector, if there's a sewer scope, if there's a well inspection, if there's a septic inspection, these are generally done by different inspectors. And then you have a wave of contractors that may come through the house as well, ordered by the buyer or maybe ordered by the seller. But again, if they're ordered by the buyer and you have to give access to the home, you need to think about, okay, I'm going to need to have my schedule, a little bit of flexibility in the schedule to be able to coordinate the access to the property during the time for these inspections. So when you receive, one thing I like to do is just to mention to that buyer's agent, because I really don't know what level of training they have or how they approach their business, is to say to that buyer's agent, hey, make sure you do not send me any part of the inspection response, the inspection report, unless we request it. Because if you get that inspection report, technically, if there's a defect, you are required to disclose it to any future buyer that might come along. So the less I know about it, the less the seller knows about any of the defects for the house, the better. The only thing that we want to see, you know, what I might do is suggest that that buyer's agent just submit an inspection response without any parts, no photos, no excerpts from the report. Get a copy of that response, take a look at it, and decide what you want to do from there. Because once they send it your way, you're kind of stuck with it. And so I like to request, just send me the response that you got, the items that you want, and then I'll review that I'll review it myself, I'll review it with the seller, and then we'll discuss potential responses to their initial proposal. Now in the inspection response form 35R, you do have a couple back and forths between the seller and the buyer. Seller can't get out of the deal, buyer can get out of the deal, but we do have a little opportunity to go back and forth. So not only in writing do we have an opportunity to go back and forth, I like to get on the phone and have conversations with that other agent and talk it through. What if we did this? What if we did that? What does the buyer really want? Here's what the seller really wants. Here's what the seller is willing and not willing to do in regard to any of the items that have come up on the inspection. So there's a couple different options, outcomes that can happen at the end of that process. One is maybe they ask for a bunch of different items, but the buyer says, you know what, you don't have to fix anything. We'll just take a reduced price. Or we want a credit. That's an option that could happen. Or we want the following repairs to be completed. So let's say this. Let's say there's 3 windows in the home that need to be replaced. And then you have to decide, is the buyer going to get bids for those windows? Or is that going to be on the seller? Is the buyer going to identify, we want you to use these kind of windows and this contractor do the installation prior to closing? Or is that going to be on the seller's plate? So there's so many different variables. And so you really have to be clear-headed and think big picture on this inspection response, because it is a make or break deal. It's also a make or break for your relationship with your client, the seller. Because if you fumble this, if you don't handle it correctly, you can put them in a position they don't really want to be in. So buyer sends the inspection response, you talk to the seller, you decide how you want to respond back. Buyer then has another chance to counter your counter, and eventually we get to the finish line where there's no more back and forths. It's either they're in or they're out. Either you're going to negotiate an agreement, or they're going to walk away. Once you have that signed around Form 35R inspection response, then you can move on to the next step of the transaction. What you want to do with that form is send a copy of that to escrow, let them know your past inspection. You need to upload that into our archive. We use Brokermint right now. I don't know what we're going to be using eventually when you watch this video, but you need to archive that somehow, a copy of that inspection response. And then the last step is to go into the MLS, and you're going to change that status from pending inspection to pending. A lot of complicated moving pieces in the inspection response whole operation. So get somebody else involved in this to look over your shoulder. Run this by somebody else. Don't try to do this all by yourself, especially in the beginning. But that is negotiating inspection on behalf of your seller.